A millionaire disguises himself as a cashier to test his son's fiancée, and what she says leaves him speechless. The main hall of the Montero mansion sparkled with golden lights and the clinking of champagne glasses. The crème de la crème of society had gathered to celebrate the engagement of Alexander Montero, heir to a business empire, and Valerie Sanchez, a young and stunning rising model. Valerie, with her brown hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders and dressed in a designer gown that accentuated her slender figure, smiled radiantly as she received congratulations from the guests. However, behind that perfect smile lay a secret that threatened to destroy everything. "Congratulations, dear," exclaimed a middle-aged woman, kissing both of Valerie's cheeks. "How lucky you are to be joining the Montero family." "Thank you. It's a dream come true," Valerie responded with a rehearsed smile. A few feet away, Alexander chatted animatedly with a group of friends. Tall, with dark hair and green eyes, he was the epitome of success and charm. His gaze met Valerie's, and he winked, making her heart race, but not for the reasons everyone assumed. In a secluded corner of the hall, an imposing man watched the scene intently. Ernest Montero, Alexander's father and the family patriarch, couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Something about Valerie's demeanor seemed off. He couldn't explain it, but years of business experience had taught him to trust his instincts. "Everything okay, Dad?" Alexander asked, approaching with Valerie on his arm. Ernest forced a smile. "Of course, son. I was just thinking about how quickly time has passed. It seems like only yesterday you were running through these halls." Valerie laughed sweetly. "You must be very proud of Alexander, Mr. Montero. He's a wonderful man." "I am," Ernest replied, studying the young woman's face. "And I hope you value him as he deserves, Valerie." For a moment, something flashed in Valerie's eyes, but it disappeared so quickly that Ernest wondered if he had imagined it. "Excuse me," Valerie said. "I need to freshen up for a moment." As she walked away, Ernest grabbed his son's arm. "Alexander, are you sure about this? Marriage is a serious step, and you barely know Valerie." Alexander sighed. "Dad, we've talked about this. I know it's fast, but I'm in love. Valerie is the woman of my dreams." Ernest wanted to insist, but held back. He didn't want to ruin his son's night with unfounded suspicions. Meanwhile, Valerie slipped into the mansion's garden. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Marcos, it's me," she whispered. "Everything is going according to plan. They're completely fooled." The voice on the other end sounded anxious. "Are you sure, Val? We can't afford any mistakes." "Relax, love," Valerie replied, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "In a few months, we'll be enjoying the Montero fortune and starting the life we always dreamed of. I love you, Val. Be careful. And I love you. We'll be together soon." Valerie hung up and took a deep breath, composing her expression before returning to the party. What she didn't know was that her conversation hadn't gone unnoticed. Hidden behind a hedge, Ernest Montero had heard every word, and his face darkened with a mix of pain and determination. "So that's how it is, Miss Sanchez," he murmured to himself. "Well then, let the games begin." As Valerie returned to the hall, smiling and seemingly carefree, she had no idea that she had just set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. Fate had cast the dice, and no one could predict where they would land. The days following the engagement party were a whirlwind of activity. Valerie threw herself into wedding preparations, choosing dresses, flowers, and locations with an enthusiasm that deceived even the most observant. However, in the privacy of her old apartment, away from the watchful eyes of the Montero family, the real Valerie emerged. "I can't believe we're pulling this off," said Marcos, hugging her from behind as they watched the sunset from their small terrace. Valerie turned in his arms, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and guilt. "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing, Marcos." "Val, we've talked about this," he replied, caressing her cheek. "The Monteros have more money than they could. Spend in 10 lifetimes. They won't even notice what we take, and we can start over far from all this." She nodded, but a shadow of doubt lingered in her gaze. "It's just that Alexander is so good to me, and his family has welcomed me with open arms." Marcos's expression hardened. "You're not actually falling for him, are you?" "Of course not," exclaimed Valerie, though her voice wavered slightly. "You know I love you. It's just that sometimes it's hard to pretend." "I know, love," said Marcos, softening his tone. "But think of everything we'll be able to do once we have the money. Travel, start that business we always wanted, help your family. Just a little more patience." Valerie nodded, burying her doubts deep within her heart. "You're right, I can't back out now." Meanwhile, at the Montero mansion, Ernest was in his office, reviewing a stack of documents. Since overhearing Valerie's conversation in the garden, he hadn't stopped investigating. Every detail of the young woman's life was being scrutinized, but so far, nothing seemed out of place. "I don't understand, Dad," said Alexander, sitting across from his father's desk. "Why all this investigation into Valerie? I already told you I trust her." Ernest sighed, removing his glasses to massage the bridge of his nose. "Son, in business and in life, it's always better to be sure. I don't want you to make a mistake that could cost you dearly." "Valerie isn't a business, Dad," responded Alexander, clearly upset. "She's the woman I love and plan to marry. I wish you could see her the way I do." Ernest looked at his son, torn between telling him what he had heard or continuing to investigate on his own. Finally, he decided he needed more evidence before potentially ruining Alexander's happiness. "You're right, son," he conceded. "Maybe I'm being too cautious. I promise I'll try to get to know Valerie better." Alexander smiled, relieved. "Thank you, Dad. I know once you really get to know her, you'll love her as much as I do." But Ernest Montero was not a man who gave up easily. If his suspicions were correct, he needed concrete proof, and to get it, he was willing to take drastic measures. The next day, Ernest called for a private meeting with his head of security, a former military man named Ramon. "I need you to do something for me, Ramon," said Ernest, closing the door to his office. "Something discreet and potentially unconventional." Ramon nodded, his expression impassive. "Whatever you need, Mr. Montero. I want you to follow Valerie Sanchez. Every move, every call, every person she meets, I need to know if she's plotting something against my family." "Understood, sir. Any specific directives?" Ernest hesitated for a moment before responding. "Yes, I want you to get a job at the supermarket. She frequents as a cashier or stocker, something that allows you to observe her without raising suspicion." Ramon raised an eyebrow but did not question the order. "It will be done, Mr. Montero. How long should I maintain surveillance?" "As long as it takes," Ernest replied firmly. "And Ramon, this stays between us. Not even my son must find out." "Of course, sir, absolute discretion." As Ramon left to set the plan in motion, Ernest stood, staring out the window, watching the mansion's gardens where Valerie and Alexander walked, laughing and holding hands, the perfect image of a couple in love. "I hope I'm wrong," he murmured to himself. "For everyone's sake, I hope I'm wrong." But deep down, Ernest Montero knew that his instincts were rarely wrong. And if he was right, the storm that was coming could destroy not only his son's dreams, but the very foundations of the Montero family. What none of them could imagine was that fate had prepared surprises that would surpass their most elaborate plans and deepest fears. The weeks went by, and life at the Montero mansion seemed to proceed normally. Valerie had adapted surprisingly well to her new status, participating in charity events, accompanying Alexander to important business dinners, and winning the affection of much of the household staff. However, beneath the surface, the currents of deceit and suspicion continued to flow. Valerie continued her clandestine meetings with Marcos, although it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. One afternoon, while doing her usual grocery shopping, Valerie found herself face-to-face with an older man with a friendly demeanor at the checkout. "Good afternoon, miss," greeted the cashier with a kind smile. "Did you find everything you were looking for?" Valerie, distracted by a message from Marcos on her phone, barely looked up. Yes, everything's fine. Just hurry up, will you? I'm in a rush." Valerie's curt tone contrasted sharply with the sweet and considerate image she projected at the Montero mansion. The cashier, unfazed, continued scanning the items. "Of course, miss, my apologies for the inconvenience," he replied serenely. Something in the man's tone made Valerie finally look up. For an instant, she thought she saw a familiar glint in the cashier's eyes, but she quickly dismissed it. "I'm sorry," she muttered, suddenly feeling guilty. "It's been a stressful day." The cashier nodded understandingly. "No worries, we all have days like that. I hope the rest of your day gets better." As Valerie left the supermarket, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. What she didn't know was that the friendly cashier was none other than Ernest Montero, disguised and determined to uncover the true nature of his son's fiancée. That night, in the privacy of his study, Ernest reflected on the encounter. "Her mask slipped for a moment, Ramon," he commented to his head of security. "I saw the real Valerie Sanchez and I didn't like what I saw." Ramon, standing by the window, nodded. "What do you plan to do now, sir?" Ernest sighed heavily. "Keep watching. I need to be absolutely sure before I act. If my suspicions are correct, this could destroy Alexander." Meanwhile, in her room, Valerie wrestled with her own demons sitting in front of the mirror. She stared at her reflection with a mixture of disgust and confusion. "Who are you? Really?" she whispered to herself. The sound of her phone pulled her from her thoughts. It was a message from Marcos. "Everything's set for tomorrow. Don't forget, love. Soon, we'll be free." Valerie felt a knot in her stomach. The plan was simple. Tomorrow, during a business lunch, she would distract Alexander while Marcos infiltrated Ernest's office to obtain information about the family's bank accounts. With trembling hands, Valerie replied, "Understood. Be careful." Just then, there was a knock on her door. It was Alexander, with a radiant smile and a small gift in his hands. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, entering the room. Valerie quickly hid her phone. "Of course not, love," she replied, forcing a smile. "You're always welcome." Alexander approached and handed her the small package. "I know we have that important business lunch tomorrow, but I wanted to give you this. First." Valerie opened the gift with trembling fingers, revealing a delicate diamond necklace. "Oh, Alexander, it's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, kissing her gently. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done these past months. I know adapting to this life hasn't been easy, but you've handled it with such grace." Alexander's words were like daggers to Valerie's heart. For a moment, she was tempted to confess everything, to end the charade once and for all. But the memory of Marcos, of their shared dreams, stopped her. "Thank you, my love," she whispered, hugging Alexander to hide the tears threatening to escape her eyes. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." That night, Valerie could barely sleep. Her dreams were filled with confusing images. Marcos calling her from the shadows, Alexander looking at her with disappointment, and the face of the old cashier at the supermarket, watching her with eyes that seemed to see everything. The next morning, the plan went into action. Valerie accompanied Alexander to the business lunch, while Marcos prepared to infiltrate the Montero mansion. What neither of them knew was that Ernest, suspecting something might happen, had decided not to attend the lunch and stay home. At the restaurant, Valerie did everything she could to keep Alexander distracted, laughing at his jokes and showing an unusual interest in the business details they were discussing. However, her mind was elsewhere, imagining Marcos moving stealthily through the mansion's corridors. Meanwhile, at the Montero house, Marcos had managed to get in thanks to the information provided by Valerie about the staff's schedules. With his heart pounding, he headed to Ernest's office. What he didn't expect was to find the Montero patriarch sitting calmly in his chair as if he were waiting for him. "Good afternoon, young man," said Ernest with a calm that chilled the blood. "Can I help you with something?" Marcos, paralyzed by surprise, couldn't utter a word. At that moment, Ramon appeared behind him, blocking his only escape route. Back at the restaurant, Alexander received a call that made him pale. "I'm sorry, Valerie, we have to go. There's been a problem at home." Valerie's heart stopped. What kind of problem? I don't know exactly, replied Alexander, already standing up. But my father says it's urgent. The drive back to the mansion was torture for Valerie. 1,000 scenarios played out in her mind, each worse than the last. When they finally arrived, the scene they found in Ernest's office confirmed her worst fears. Marcos was sitting in a chair, guarded by Ramon. While Ernest looked at them all with a mix of disappointment and contained fury, "Alexander, Valerie, I'm glad you're here," said Ernest with a calm that bode nothing good. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Valerie felt her world crumble around her. The masks had fallen, and now she would have to face the consequences of her actions. But what no one in that room could imagine was that this was only the beginning of a series of revelations that would shake the foundations of their lives. The silence in Ernest Montero's study was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Alexander looked alternately at his father, Valerie, and the stranger guarded by Ramon, trying to make sense of the situation. "Dad, what's going on here?" he finally asked, his voice trembling slightly. Ernest stood slowly from his chair, his eyes never leaving Valerie's face. "That, my son, is exactly what we all want to know, Valerie. Why don't you start? It seems you have a lot to explain." Valerie felt her legs might give out at any moment. She looked at Marcos, seeking support, but he kept his gaze fixed on the floor. She was alone in this. She began, but the words stuck in her throat. "Maybe I can help you," Ernest intervened. "How about we start by explaining who this young man is and why he was snooping around my office?" Alexander turned to Valerie, suspicion growing in his eyes. "Val, what's my father talking about?" Valerie closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there was a resolution in them that no one had seen before. "His name is Marcos," she said finally, "and he was my boyfriend." The impact of those words was immediate. Alexander recoiled as if physically struck, while Ernest nodded with a mix of sadness and confirmation. "Continue," urged Ernest. "We met years ago when I was just starting out in modeling," Valerie explained, the words now pouring out in an unstoppable torrent. "We always dreamed of a better life, away from difficulties and hardships. When I met Alexander, we saw an opportunity." "An opportunity," Alexander repeated, his voice laden with pain and disbelief. "Is that what I was to you? An opportunity?" Valerie approached him, trying to take his hand, but Alexander pulled away. "No, Alexander, it's not that simple at first. Yes, I admit it, but then..." "Then what?" Ernest interrupted. "Then you realized my son was more than a walking wallet?" "Yes," exclaimed Valerie, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I fell in love, Alexander. Truly, I didn't expect it to happen, but it did. And I've been struggling with this for weeks, torn between what I felt for you and my loyalty to Marcos, to our plans." Marcos, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "It's true, I've seen it in her eyes, in the way she talks about you. She's not the same Valerie I knew." Alexander ran a hand over his face, trying to process all the information. "Then what exactly was this plan? What were you planning to do?" Valerie and Marcos exchanged a look before she answered. We wanted access to the family's accounts, to take enough to start a new life." "Steal?" Alexander's voice broke. "You were going to steal from my family?" "Son," Ernest interjected, his tone surprisingly gentle, "I think we should take a moment to..." But Alexander was already moving, heading towards the door. "I need air, I need to think." Before anyone could stop him, he had left the study, leaving behind a silence heavy with tension. Ernest turned to Ramon. "Take young Marcos to the security room. Keep him comfortable but under watch. We'll have a long conversation later." As Ramon escorted Marcos out of the room, Ernest found himself alone with Valerie. The young woman looked as if she had aged years in minutes, her usual composure completely gone. "Mr. Montero," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I know I have no right to ask anything, but please let me talk to Alexander. I need to explain." Ernest studied her for a long moment before responding. "You know, when I first met you, I had a feeling something told me you weren't what you seemed. I even disguised myself as a cashier at the supermarket to observe you." Valerie's eyes widened in surprise as she remembered the kind old man at the checkout. "It was you." Yes, confirmed Ernest. I saw a side of you I didn't like. But now seeing you like this, so vulnerable and remorseful, I wonder if perhaps I judged you too quickly. Valerie looked at him, a spark of hope igniting in her eyes. Don't get me wrong, Ernest continued. What you did, what you planned to do, is unforgivable. But I also know that people can change, that love can transform us. He approached the window, looking out at the gardens where Alexander used to play as a child. My son loves you, Valerie. And if what you say is true, you love him too. The question is that love strong enough to overcome this? Valerie joined him at the window, her eyes searching for Alexander in the gardens. I will do whatever it takes to prove it, to prove to everyone that I've changed. Ernest nodded slowly. Then you will have your chance, but I warn you, Valerie, if this is another trick, if you hurt my son again— It's not, interrupted Valerie with a firmness that surprised them both. I swear on everything sacred that it's not. Good, said Ernest, because I have a feeling this story still has many chapters ahead, and something tells me we will need to stand united to face what's coming. As Valerie and Ernest stood in silence, looking out the window, neither of them could imagine how prophetic those words would turn out to be, because at that precise moment, miles away, an older woman lay in a hospital bed, holding a secret that would change the course of their lives forever. The days following the revelation in Ernest's study were an emotional roller coaster. For everyone involved, Alexander had taken refuge in the family's beach house, refusing to speak to anyone. Valerie, for her part, was torn between crushing guilt and the desperate need to make things right. Marcos had been released under the strict condition that he not leave the city and remain. Available for further questioning, Ernest, always the strategist, had decided to keep the matter private, at least for the time being. A week after the incident, Valerie was in the mansion's garden, lost in thought, when her phone rang. The number on the screen made her frown. It was from her hometown, a place she had left behind years ago. Hello, she answered cautiously. Valerie? The voice on the other end sounded distressed. It's me, Javier, your brother. Valerie felt the world stop for a moment. She hadn't spoken to her older brother in years. Javier? What's wrong? It's Mom. Val. Javier's voice broke. She's in the hospital. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. The phone almost slipped from Valerie's trembling hands. What? No, that can't be what happened. Cancer, Javier replied. Apparently she's been hiding it for years, Val. She's asking for you. She says she needs to see you, that she has something important to tell you. Valerie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world fall on her shoulders. I'll be there as soon as possible. After hanging up, Valerie remained motionless for several minutes, trying to process the news. Finally, gathering all her strength, she went to Ernest's study. Come in, responded Ernest. To her timid knock on the door, Valerie entered, her face pale and her eyes red. Mr. Montero, I need to talk to you. Ernest, noticing her state, motioned for her to sit. What's wrong, Valerie? My mother, she began, struggling to keep her composure. She's very sick, in the hospital. I need to go see her. Ernest studied her for a moment before responding, I understand. When do you plan to leave? As soon as possible, Valerie replied. I know given the current situation, I have no right to ask for anything, but go, interrupted Ernest, his voice surprisingly gentle. Family comes first. Always. I'll make the necessary arrangements for you to have a flight tonight. Valerie looked at him, surprised by his understanding. Thank you, Mr. Montero. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he replied, standing up to circle the desk. But Valerie, promise me one thing. Anything, she said without hesitation. When you come back, whatever the outcome of your visit, we'll have a long conversation about your future, about Alexander, about everything, Ernest said firmly. Valerie nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. I promise, Mr. Montero, and thank you, truly. That same night, Valerie boarded a flight to her hometown, her heart divided between concern for her mother and fear for what she was leaving behind at the Montero mansion. Upon arriving at the hospital, Javier was waiting at the entrance. The siblings embraced, their hug laden with contained emotions and years of distance. "How is she?" Valerie asked, pulling back to look her brother in the eye. Javier shook his head, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Not good, Val. The doctors say it's a matter of days." Valerie felt the world crumble beneath her feet. "Take me to her." In the hospital room, Carmen, Sanchez lay in bed, her frail and emaciated figure barely recognizable to Valerie. However, when their eyes met, love and recognition shone in them. "My girl," Carmen whispered, extending a trembling hand. "You came." Valerie rushed to take her mother's hand, kissing it gently. "Of course I came. Mom, I'm here." Carmen smiled weakly. "I have so much to tell you, dear. So many secrets I've kept for years." "Shh, Mom," interrupted Valerie. "Don't strain yourself. We'll have time to talk when you recover." But Carmen shook her head, a fierce determination shining in her eyes. "No, Valerie, I need to tell you this now. It's about your father." Valerie frowned. Her father had abandoned the family when she was just a child. It was a topic they rarely discussed. "What about him?" Carmen took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "Your father. The man you thought was your father isn't." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Valerie looked at her mother, incredulous. "What? Mom, what are you talking about?" "Many years ago," Carmen began, her voice barely a whisper. "Before I married the man you knew as your father, I had a relationship, an intense but forbidden love." Valerie listened, feeling that each word her mother spoke changed the course of her life. "He was an important man. Married, with a family of his own," Carmen continued. "When I became pregnant, we decided it was best to keep it a secret. I married soon after the man who raised you, but he's not my real father," Valerie finished, feeling breathless. Carmen nodded weakly. "Your real father has been closer to you than you realize, Valerie. You've met him recently." Valerie felt the world spinning around her. A suspicion began to form in her mind, an idea so outrageous she didn't dare to give it shape. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "who is my father?" Carmen closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength for the final revelation. When she opened them again, she looked directly at her daughter. "Your father, Valerie, is Ernest Montero." The impact of those words was like a physical blow to Valerie. She staggered, clinging to the edge of the bed to avoid falling. Javier, who had been listening in silence, rushed to support her. "No," Valerie murmured. "It can't be. It's impossible." But deep down, she knew it was true. Ernest's strange intuitions, his interest in her from the beginning, even his recent compassion, it all took on a new and terrifying meaning. "I'm so sorry, my girl," sobbed Carmen. "We wanted to protect you, give you a normal life. But now, you needed to know." Valerie sat heavily in the chair beside the bed, her mind a whirlwind of emotions and chaotic thoughts. Alexander, the man she loved, was actually her half-brother. The Montero, empire she had planned to scam, was part of her inheritance. And Ernest, the man she had feared and respected in equal measure, was her father. "Does he know?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. Carmen shook her head. "I never told him. But I think he always suspected, Valerie, my daughter. Forgive me, forgive us both." Valerie took her mother's hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "There's nothing to forgive, Mom. But what am I going to do now?" Carmen squeezed her daughter's hand weakly. "The truth, Valerie. It's time for everyone to know the truth." As night fell over the city, Valerie remained by her mother's bed, facing a future that suddenly seemed more uncertain and terrifying than ever. The truth she had just discovered threatened to destroy everything she knew, everything she loved. But deep in her heart, she knew her mother was right. It was time to face the truth, no matter the consequences. What Valerie couldn't imagine was that this revelation was just the beginning of a series of events that would shake the foundations of the Montero family and change the course of their lives forever. The days following the revelation were a blur for Valerie. She stayed at the hospital, torn between the pain of watching her mother deteriorate and the emotional whirlwind unleashed by the truth about her. Origins Carmen Sanchez passed away a week after the confession, leaving Valerie with the heavy burden of a secret that threatened to destroy two families. The funeral was a somber and small affair. Valerie kept her distance, her mind miles away, at the Montero mansion, and the conversation she knew she would soon have to face. "What are you going to do now?" Javier asked as they returned from the cemetery. Valerie looked out the taxi window, watching the city she once called home. "I have to go back, Javier. There are things I need to resolve." Her brother looked at her with concern. "Val, whatever it is you're going through, you know you can count on me, right?" She nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know, thank you." That night, as she packed her things, Valerie made a decision she couldn't keep living with lies. It was time to face the truth, no matter the consequences. The next day, she boarded a flight back to the city where the Montero mansion was located. Throughout the journey, she rehearsed mentally how she would address the situation, but every scenario she imagined ended in disaster. When the taxi dropped her off in front of the imposing mansion gates, Valerie felt her heart race. She took a deep breath and pressed the intercom. "Montero residence," answered a familiar voice. "It's me, Valerie, I'm back." There was a moment of silence before the gate opened with a buzz. As she walked down the path to the main house, Valerie saw Ernest waiting at the entrance. "Welcome back," he said, his face a mask of calm. "I'm very sorry about your mother." Valerie nodded, unable to form words for a moment. Finally, she managed to say, "Thank you, I need to talk to you, to everyone." Ernest studied her for a moment before, nodding. "Of course, Alexander returned yesterday. He's in the library. Let's go." As she followed Ernest through the familiar halls of the mansion, Valerie felt like she was walking towards her own execution. When they entered the library, she saw Alexander sitting in an armchair, his face pale and haggard. "Valerie," he said, standing up. For a moment, it seemed he was going to approach her, but he held back. "I'm very sorry about your mother." "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Ernest closed the door behind them and turned to Valerie. "All right, you said you needed to talk to us. We're listening." Valerie looked at the two men in front of her, aware that what she was about to say would change their lives forever. She took a deep breath and began. "Before she died, my mother revealed something to me, a secret she had kept all my life." She paused, gathering courage. "Ernest, you are my biological father." The silence that followed that statement was deafening. Alexander paled even more, if that was possible, while Ernest remained completely still, his face an unreadable mask. "What?" Alexander finally managed to articulate. "No, that can't be. True, Dad. Tell her it's not true." But Ernest didn't respond. Instead, he slowly approached Valerie, his eyes fixed on her as if seeing her for the first time. "Carmen," he murmured. "She told you." Valerie nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Did you know?" Ernest shook his head. "Not with certainty. But I always suspected there's something about you, Valerie. From the moment I saw you, I felt a connection I couldn't explain." Alexander looked at both of them, disbelief and horror mixing on his face. "This can't be happening, Valerie. You're my sister," she finished, her voice breaking. "Your half-sister." Silence fell over the room again, heavy and oppressive. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, trying to process the magnitude of this revelation. Finally, Ernest spoke. We need time to assimilate this, Valerie. Please stay at the mansion. We have a lot to discuss." Alexander, without saying a word, abruptly stood up and left the library. Closing the door forcefully behind him, Valerie collapsed into an armchair, sobbing uncontrollably. Ernest, after a moment of hesitation, approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said through her tears. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I love Alexander. And now..." "Shh." Ernest calmed her, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It's not your fault, Valerie. None of us chose this." As night fell over the Montero mansion, Father and daughter remained in the library, united by a newly discovered bond and separated by years of secrets and lies. Outside in the gardens, Alexander walked aimlessly, trying to reconcile his feelings for Valerie with the devastating truth of their kinship. The truth had come to light, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The Montero family now faced its greatest challenge, and no one could predict how this story would end. The days following the revelation were an emotional whirlwind for everyone in the Montero mansion. Alexander had locked himself in his room, refusing to speak to anyone. Ernest spent long hours in his study, going through old photographs and documents as if searching for clues to a truth that had always been in plain sight. Valerie wandered the halls like a ghost, tormented by guilt and pain. A week after the confession, Ernest finally called a family meeting in the library. When Valerie entered, she found Alexander already seated, his face a mask of contained emotions. "Please sit," said Ernest, gesturing to an armchair. Valerie obeyed, avoiding looking directly at Alexander. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," Ernest began, his voice tired but firm, "about our past, our present, and most importantly, our future." He paused, looking at each of his children. "What has happened is something none of us could have predicted or wanted, but it's our reality now, and we have to decide how we're going to handle it." Alexander finally spoke, his voice hoarse from disuse. "How are we supposed to handle this, Dad? The woman I loved that I love turns out to be my sister. How do we get past something like that?" Valerie felt her heart shrink, hearing Alexander speak in the present tense about his feelings. Ernest sighed deeply. "It won't be easy, son, but we are family, and family stays together, especially in difficult times." He turned to Valerie. "Valerie, I know you entered our lives with other intentions, but I also know that your feelings for Alexander became genuine. And now, knowing the truth about your origin, I hope you can see this house, this family, as your own." Valerie nodded, silent tears running down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. My whole life has been a lie. And now I don't know who I really am." Ernest took her hands in his. "You are my daughter, Valerie and Alexander's sister. That's all that matters now." Alexander stood up abruptly, walking to the window. "And what are we supposed to do with how we feel? Just forget it?" "No," Ernest replied gently. "We can't erase our feelings, but we can learn to transform them. The love you feel for each other can become a strong and beautiful sibling bond." Valerie looked at Alexander, who finally turned to face her. Their eyes met, and at that moment, both felt the weight of everything they had lived and everything they had lost. "I need time," Alexander said finally, "to process all this, to learn to see you differently, Valerie." She nodded, understanding perfectly. "I know, me too." Ernest watched them both, a mix of pain and hope in his eyes. "We'll take this one day at a time, together as a family." Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the Montero mansion began to adapt to its new reality. Valerie moved into a room in the opposite wing to Alexander's, giving them both the space they needed. Ernest, for his part, made an effort to get to know the daughter he never knew he had. One afternoon, while Valerie was walking in the gardens, she found Alexander sitting on a bench, staring at the horizon. "Can I join you?" she asked, indicating the empty space beside him. Alexander nodded silently. For several minutes they sat like that, in a silence heavy with unspoken emotions. "You know," Alexander finally said, "sometimes I wonder how things would have been if we had known the truth from the beginning." Valerie looked at him sideways. "Do you think it would have been easier?" "I don't know," he replied honestly, "but at least we wouldn't have had to go through all this." Valerie felt a pang of guilt. "Alexander, I am so sorry for everything." He turned to look at her directly. "I know, Val, and though part of me wants to hate you for what you planned to do, I can't, because I know your feelings were real. In the end, mine were too." "They are," she corrected gently. "Maybe not in the same way as before, but I love you, Alexander, as my brother, as my family." Alexander gave a small smile. the first in weeks. "I love you too, Val. And I suppose now we have a lifetime to figure out what that really means." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Valerie and Alexander remained seated on that bench, shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, but it was a beginning. A beginning based on truth, forgiveness, and the promise of a future together, as a family. From the second-floor window, Ernest watched his two children, a smile of satisfaction on his face. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be difficult days and moments of doubt, but he also knew that, for the first time in decades, his family was complete, and approached and, after a moment of hesitation, gave her a quick hug. These gestures of fraternal affection still felt a bit awkward, but each day they became more natural. "Need any help?" he asked, reaching for a cup to pour himself coffee. "You can set the table if you want," Valerie replied. "Dad should be down any moment." The word "dad" still sounded strange on her lips, but every time she used it, she felt a warm sensation in her chest. Ernest had been patient and loving, giving her the space to adapt to her new reality, while gradually including her in all aspects of family life. As Alexander set the plates, Valerie couldn't help but think about how much things had changed. Just a few months ago, she was planning to scam this family. Now she was making Sunday breakfast for them. "Good morning, family," greeted Ernest, entering the kitchen with the newspaper under his arm. "Good morning, Dad," responded Valerie and Alexander in unison, exchanging an amused look at their synchronization. The three of them sat at the table, enjoying Valerie's pancakes and discussing their plans for the day. It was a mundane scene, almost banal, but for them, it represented a triumph, a testament to their ability to overcome adversity and rebuild relationships. "By the way," said Ernest, as he spread jam on his pancake, "I've been thinking, Valerie, I know you left your modeling career when all this happened. Have you thought about what you'd like to do now?" Valerie put down her fork, surprised by the question. "The truth is, I haven't thought much about it. I suppose I've been so focused on adapting to all this that—" "I understand," Ernest nodded, "but I think it's important for you to find something you're passionate about, something that's yours." Alexander chimed in. "What about working at the Family Foundation? We're always looking for new perspectives, and I think you could bring a lot to the table." Valerie considered the idea. The Montero Foundation focused on social and educational development projects, something she had always been interested in, but never had the opportunity to explore. "I'd like that," she said finally, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "I think it could be a good way to redeem myself, to do something positive." Ernest squeezed her hand gently. "You don't need to redeem yourself, daughter, but if this is something you want to do, you have our full support." The rest of the breakfast was filled with plans and ideas for the future. For the first time in a long while, Valerie felt truly hopeful. She had a family, a purpose, an opportunity to make things right after breakfast, while Alexander and Ernest handled the dishwashing, insisting it was only fair since she had cooked. Valerie stepped outside into the garden. The morning sun bathed the flowers in golden light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of roses. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She thought of her mother, of the secret she had kept for so many years. She thought of Marcos and the life she had planned with him, a life built on lies and deceit. And finally, she thought of the family she had found, of the unconditional love she had experienced despite her mistakes. "Everything okay?" Alexander asked, joining her in the garden. Valerie opened her eyes and smiled at her brother. "Yes, everything's fine. I was just thinking how lucky I am." Alexander put an arm around her shoulders. "We all are, Val. We've been through a lot, but we're here together." From the kitchen window, Ernest watched his children, a smile of satisfaction on his face. Life had given them a second chance, and they were determined to make the most of it, as the sun rose higher in the sky, promising a new day full of possibilities. The Montero family prepared to face the future. They didn't know what challenges awaited them, but they were sure of one thing: they would face them together, as the family they were always meant to be. And so, on that quiet Sunday morning, A new era began for the Montero family. An era of honesty, unconditional love, and second chances. The telenovela of their lives had taken an unexpected turn, but the ending, though different from what they had imagined, promised to be more satisfying and real than any script they could have written.